Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review show for the weekend of June 14th through the 16th, 2019. We are deep in the summer season here, but it's not looking great. So we had three new wide release openers this weekend. We had Men in Black International. We had Shaft 2019, and then we had Late Night, which opened up a little bit smaller. And then we had not really a wide release, but The Dead Don't Die opened up on 600 theaters. So we're going to talk about all those movies, and we're going to walk through the top 10, see how they all did. None of them did very well, to be honest with you. And then we will check out maybe some limited releases, check in with maybe The Last Black Man in San Francisco, see how that's doing. And then we will talk about what's going to happen here for the rest of June. Let's start out here with the number one movie of the weekend, which was Men in Black International. Came in at $28.5 million. This opened up in 4,224 theaters, so that per theater average was $6,747. Not good at all. So that's not a good opening. That's not a good per theater average at all. I mean, it's not even remotely close to being good. For something like this, you'd hope and expect that it would be... at least $10K per theater. That would have put it at what? I mean, it was $10K per theater, it would have been $40 million, wouldn't it? 4,424 times 10K. Yeah, it would have 42. So that's a little bit outrageous, but I think that's probably was the target, about a $10K per theater situation here. That didn't happen. Didn't even break 7K. This is pretty much a disastrous open for Men in Black International. We can take a look back here just really briefly on Men in Black and where it's been and what was its financial sort of performance over the last, 22 years now. It's been a franchise. So the original Men in Black did come out in July 1997. And it was a huge hit. I remember going to see it opening weekend. It was July 4th holiday meant a lot more back then. That could be just anecdotal that I'm saying that, but it just felt like it was much bigger than it was and is now. I feel like the summer movie season has really shifted more towards the June, May, and now even the end of April, obviously with Endgame this year and Infinity War last year. It really feels like the summer just shifted forward, where the center and sort of peak used to be the July 4th holiday. It's not anymore. But back in 97, it was. And Men in Black opened up. It opened at, and these are now adjusted rates right now, are adjusted for inflation numbers. Opened up at $100 million, closed out at 492 based on today's ticket price. So an absolutely fantastic performance for that movie, a huge blockbuster back in the 90s. So they did decide to come back later, but it was 5 years later. And I always wondered about that because I remember, back then when Men in Black did so well, you just assumed by like 99 at the latest, or 2000 probably at the latest, they would have a sequel out in the summer. And it took an extra 2-3 years to get there. But Men in Black 2 did open up in... the same July 4th slot on July 3rd, 2002, opened at $80 million, closed out at $295. So a significant sort of lower performance here than the first one. I actually did not look at, I'm kind of curious now to look at international, how the difference was. So these are actuals. Let me try and get you the adjusted numbers. Of course, it doesn't work for adjusted. So these are unadjusted. Worldwide, the original did 589. Internationally, worldwide, the sequel did 441. So you can already, kind of a very similar sort of take in terms of domestic versus foreign. It just was an overall sort of underperformance compared to the first one by a pretty significant margin. So that's kind of, I think, where they sort of said, hey, let's not do this again anytime soon. I don't think people really liked the second one. I don't remember the second Men in Black all that well, but the only thing I do remember is it just does not have a good taste in people's mouths. They just did not like it. And so Men in Black 3 eventually came out, but it was 10 years later, May 2012, opened up at 60 million adjusted, closed out at 199. So again, $20 million less opening weekend than the second, $40 million less opening weekend than the first, with a total take that was $300 million off the original, just domestically. What did Men in Black do internationally? Let's check that out real quick. It did 624. See, this is a perfect example, and one of the reasons why Men in Black International is being made. The domestic take on Men in Black 3 was only 28% of its total versus 43% for Men in Black 1 and Men in Black 2. And this is just like the whole changing business. The box office in Hollywood is becoming much more of a global, worldwide business. It always has been, but now it's just sort of movie studios and production companies are banking on a good performance in China, a good performance in Brazil or Russia or the UK, to sort of to put it over the top. And I think when I read through today's, we look at that $28.5 million number for Men in Black International, and it's not even obviously near these other ones. It's not even really in the same ballpark when you look at it. I mean, 28 versus like 60 for MIB3 versus 80 versus 100 for the original. Like, this is not in the same caliber of those other films. And it is, what are we? God, I forgot Men in Black 2 came out, what was it, 7 years ago? I thought it came out like at the late aughts. I thought if someone asked me when Men in Black 3 came out, I'd never seen it. I would have guessed like 2008, 2009, not 2012. So there's been a long delay for this second one. It's a reboot, right? We have Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson as the lead, as opposed to Samuel Jackson, Will Smith, and Tommy Lee Jones. So we'll talk about Samuel Jackson and Shaft here in a bit. Total reboot of the series to some degree, kind of similar, and Deadline brings this up a lot. One of the reasons they thought that it's failing so bad is that it wasn't a hard reboot. It was kind of a soft reboot. And I think that's a fair assessment of why Men in Black International is not doing so hot here, especially domestically. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the data and the numbers and what we're seeing in terms of response to the movie itself. So Rotten Tomatoes for Men in Black International, 23% Rotten score, which is horrifically bad, 45 out of 100. It's a terrible film. Like, people don't like to talk about objective, subjective. It's a shit film. According to critics, it's just awful. Verified audience score is 67%. That's also really low. 74 out of 100 is the actual score. All audience score 60%, 89 out of 100. I think that might be a little bit off. But the verified audience score is very low for a movie like this. Remember, verified audience is people who actually buy tickets on Fandango, then rate it on Rotten Tomatoes. Is it tweakable? Is it hackable? Sure. But is it hard to hack? Yeah, you're going to have to go buy tickets. Or movie studios got to buy tickets up for this and have people rate it. It's totally like they could hack it, but I feel like it's a pretty decent idea of how the film's actually doing, what the actual response is. I think it's probably as close as you can get to like a cinema score or post track where it's in person. Speaking of cinema score, be on cinema score, which is not, that's pretty bad actually. I'm thinking about it for a movie like this, a post track of 3 stars, which is very bad. So overall, what we're seeing here is critics absolutely hate it. Audiences don't like it much at all. Letterbox score, film nerds, film snobs, if you will, 52 out of 100, which is bad, really bad. Comparing that to Men in Black, the original, Men in Black's not really that high, 2.8 or a 70 out of 100 for the Letterbox crew. Men in Black 2, 54. So Men in Black is probably like a 56. Men in Black 2 is a 54. So not very high, but it's interesting that this one's kind of in line with those. So for whatever reason, the film nerds never have really liked Men in Black. Men in Black 3, though, has a 3 or a 60 out of 100 on Letterboxd. Compared to the director's other film, big film, Fate of the Furious, 360, right? 60 out of 100, so pretty typical. And just to throw this in here, Thor Ragnarok, because Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson also starred in that. Not even, when was that released? Was that last year or 2 years ago? I can't remember. I think it was a year and a half ago. That did a 3.8 or a 76 out of 100. So these films are, the Men in Black series is not highly rated amongst these folks. The film nerds, the general audience went to go see it, did not like it, and critics absolutely hate it. So what we have here is a bad movie. Objectively, it's a bad movie. I just gave you like 100 data points to prove that. It's not good. People are not responding well to it, different groups of people. Okay, so $110 million production budget here. The last one was $225 million, the production budget. So they definitely cut that in half, which was good. Some people are saying it was $94 million. This is like a Deadline source. I don't really get what the deviation is there. Is that like insider sources trying to say, oh, we didn't spend that much money? I guess that's what's happening here. The global marketing spend on this, because it is very much a global movie, is $120 million. It did okay overseas. Like, I think it's sitting at like $100 million so far worldwide. Break even, according to industry insiders, according to Deadline, about $300 million worldwide for Men in Black International to break even. So it is sitting at $102 million so far. It's hard to really read. I don't know if it's open in every single market at the same time. But Deadline is like suggesting that it could break even. That seems like a really rose-colored view of this situation. This is a massive flop domestically. There's no other way you can write it. This is a huge disaster. And it shouldn't really be all that unexpected, I don't think. Like, if you look at the history of the series, these movies have never gone up in box office. They've always gone significantly down. With the last one that cost $225 million to produce, I mean, we're looking at what, $624 million worldwide. I can give you kind of a guess on how this thing did. It definitely lost money. Even though it made a ton of money overseas, it made $400 million overseas, it still probably was not enough to make up those insane production costs, which is why we probably have the big reboot 7 years later. Men in Black International, they did cut that production budget in half. I just don't see how, even if it plays amazingly overseas and it's like a 25-75 domestic to foreign take, I just don't see how it's really going to make any money here. I feel like it's definitely going to be a loss. So I don't really buy Deadline's viewpoint on that. So audience, 51% male, 49% female. I do have new MPA data that I finally got around to inputting here. So the demographic data that I use is going to be a little bit updated. The racial breakdown, ethnic breakdown will be a little bit different as well. The big change that I saw in terms of 2017 data to 2018 data is men are going more often. So the breakdown of total tickets sold has increased to 53% male, 47% female. So that's sort of our average moving forward. So here was 51% male, 49% female. So kind of right in the average area. 72% were under 35. That's a really... that's a high number. Usually it's reversed. Usually it's like the over 25s are like 70%. Here it played very young. Majority of the people, 52%, were between 18 and 34. In terms of the racial breakdown here, 47% white. The new average for that is 55% white is the number of ticket buyers. So this was a little bit under indexed with the white audience. Latinos were at 21, 18% Asian other, 14% African American. The biggest over index here would be the Asian audience. Usually they're only about 7% of the ticket buying audience for the average movie. So, okay, that's a lot of numbers to throw at you. So what's the final verdict on this? This is a huge bust. It's a massive flop. Deadline, I think, is right to some degree that, like, fine, it's going to make a ton of money overseas, like a 25-75 breakdown in terms of domestic to foreign, but, like, I just don't see how it's going to make up the ground here. Even with the marketing budget was $120 million worldwide, which is definitely on the lower end of a huge worldwide release, but that's still a ton of money. $110 million production budget isn't going to go away. I just don't think that this is a very successful film. I don't think it's going to make break even when you include the VOD, TV, pay stuff, and like basic cable rights. I just don't see it happening for Men in Black International. And so we take a big step back and say why. Deadline is saying that like it wasn't a hard reboot. I think that is at least one pillar to that collapsed here. It's just it wasn't that interesting of a movie. It wasn't that interesting of a product at the end of the day. But I do think that there was a place for a new Men in Black movie. I mean, Men in Black was originally, I believe, a comic book. So we're in the comic book movie, peak here. You would think that they would be able to put out a product here that was based on a graphic novel comic book that would do quite well with a proven IP that goes back 22 years. The elements existed here for a successful movie. I think what happened is that the marketing on this was just not good. There was no hook to what was going on. And I do buy the fact that like Deadline essentially says it just seemed like a retread. They're right. It did seem like a retread. And that's one of the reasons why it's not doing so well at all and why it's flopping pretty massively here in the US and Canada. But at the same time, I do feel like there was the potential here for something special to happen. And I don't even think you had to do a super hard reboot. I mean, because the argument against that would be, then why is all the nostalgia working for Disney? Aladdin wasn't a hard reboot. Lion King's not a hard reboot. Jungle Book wasn't. So I don't really buy that. Jurassic World wasn't really a hard reboot. I mean, to some degree it was, but like not really. So Star Wars hasn't been, what I've been seeing in the last, let's say 5 years, ever since Force Awakens, is that, and Jurassic World too, I think, is that there's built-in awareness for certain types of movies and franchises that you can absolutely capitalize on with very minimal changing that narrative universe. Sometimes it doesn't work, like Fantastic Beasts, I think, has kind of been a failure as an offshoot of the Harry Potter world, but Jurassic World's a win. The new Star Wars movies are huge wins, except for Solo. And I just think that, I think that's the success of those films, and especially the Disney live remakes, proves that Beauty and the Beast proves that, you don't have to change stuff all that much. You just have to make it seem fresh. And I think that's what happened here. I think you could have made a movie that was Men in Black with brand new people in the leads, paying a pretty deep homage to the original trilogy. But all you have to do is make it feel new, make it feel like it's something of now. And I don't think Men in Black International felt like it was of now. It felt like it was a throwback in not a good way, like lame jokes, this same stupid sort of shtick, but you didn't have the comedic chops of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, and also that chemistry that they had, which was always fantastic. So you didn't have those elements. You had to do something else, and I think they tried to do the spaghetti in the wall thing just to see what stuck, and nothing really stuck all that much. And that's why audiences aren't showing up, because again, I always come back to this, and we'll talk about this a lot with Late Night when I get there. You have to create a spectacle, and a spectacle that will get people to take 3 to 4 hours of their free time to go out to a location, to pay $15 to sit in a chair around other random strangers to watch something on a screen. It has to be something special. Men in Black International did not seem special, and that's why people did not show up. It's pretty much that simple. Whereas what Captain Marvel or Aladdin or Lion King coming up or Endgame, those all feel special. I think they're all Disney too. Disney rules the world is the end of this story. It's the end of every podcast for the next 5 years. Disney is the ruler of us all. Okay, so that's my kind of extended rant on Men in Black International. I wish it had done better. I just wish it was a better movie, because at the end of the day, it's a really bad product, and people didn't show up to buy it, is what it comes down to. So that was number 1, though, at 28.5 million. Drop will probably be 50% plus next weekend. Number 2 is Secret Life of Pets, 23.8 million, 49% drop, which is not good at all for a children's animation film. You want to be in the mid to low 40s on that. Per theater average is $5,200. Total take so far for Secret Life of Pets 2 will be $92 million so far domestically. This one, I don't think it's going to have any problem breaking even or making a little bit of money. It's just nowhere near the phenomenon that was the original. And the original was just an amazing performing movie, even though it wasn't really good. Worldwide, Secret Life of Pets sits at $154 million right now. It's just not even going to come close to the original. And I think it kind of ends that series with Universal. And maybe good riddance, because I've never met anybody who said these were great movies. I just went to go see it because there was something else. That's essentially what that came down to. So Secret Life of Pets 2 kind of not flopping, but definitely underperforming, and probably won't see a third one. Number 3 this weekend was Aladdin, still hanging in there in its 4th weekend, 16.7 million, 32% drop. What is going on? This thing is not dropping at all. $263 million so far in the US and Canada. Like, this is outrageous how well this is doing. I cannot say enough how low that drop is. 32% on a weekend where a lot of stuff dropped higher than 40-50%. So very bizarre to me that this is not dropping a lot. Sits at $724 million worldwide. That's a fantastic, amazing performance in its first 4 weeks. Right now, like, there's so much doubt with Aladdin going into it. I'm not sure why it's performing so well. I guess people love it. I mean, if you look at the verified score, it's like in the mid 90s on Rotten Tomatoes. The critics absolutely did not like it. But the audiences are eating it up. There's something about it they really enjoy. Kids like it, families like it, parents like it. It's going to stick around for a while. I think the big thing, it's going to have a big drop next weekend because of Toy Story 4. I think it's next weekend, yeah. So that's going to take a huge chunk out of this audience, or potential audience, but it's already had a really great run. And I think it's one of the bigger stories of the year. Just like Disney can do no wrong. Like Disney, it's funny, like it's not that Disney can do no wrong. It's like Disney also had Dumbo this year, which is one of the biggest flops of the year. But it's the tale of two sort of paths here. Like, you have the Aladdin stuff, which works really well, which is totally a throwback to recent nostalgia, like within like 25 years. Then you have Dumbo, which is super old, in 50, 60 years old, I think, right? And so that's not working at all. So maybe there's like a lesson that Disney is coming across. Like, if they can reboot every movie they've made in the last 30 years, I think they would. But before that, it just doesn't work because it's too old. Maybe they're not the right audience. And even Aladdin's doing fantastic. Number 4 was Dark Phoenix. We talked so much about this movie last weekend. I don't think I can talk too much more about it. $9 million this weekend. A 73% drop. Keep in mind, it did not lose any theaters because it's in that 2-week contractual window where they have to keep showing it. That's one of the worst drops I have ever seen for a major studio wide release movie. You'll see drops like that for smaller stuff from smaller studios that they just throw out there to see how they do. This is an X-Men movie and it's dropping 72%. That's like a bad drop for like Freddy versus Jason or a horror movie. Then those pop off opening weekend just disappear by the second weekend. This is an absolute disaster. It's so bad that the director did an in-depth radio interview, I think, with whatever the public station is out in Los Angeles, saying it's my fault. Like, I'm sorry this happened, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was like bad. And so a 72% drop it's dead. This thing is DOA. It's not going to make much more money at all. So it's sitting at $51 million right now. Is it going to hit 70? Is it going to hit 75? I don't know. It's a very sad ending to the X-Men saga. I'm sure Disney is sort of like, they're like, okay, man, like the worse this thing does, the quicker we can reboot it, is essentially what they're thinking. I think MCU looks at this, and Disney and Marvel, and they say, okay, that's a blank slate. We can start production right now on the next MCU X-Men movie. And I think they might, because if I were them, I would have an X-Men movie out in 3 years. Give me something in 2022. I don't care if it's like an origin pick of one of the X-Men, or I wouldn't do an ensemble right away. I think that's a mistake. I would do 3 or 4 origin picks or single character stories, start tossing in different X-Men in those stories, and then give me an ensemble one maybe in like 2025. And that could be a nice offset of the Avengers coming to a close. But Dark Phoenix is one of the biggest disasters I think I've ever seen. And this is what happens. It's hubris. And like this Deadline talked about the people in the industry about this, and the executives over there, they thought Apocalypse was just a one-off failure, when everybody else in the world, especially people following the box office at the time, were like, well, this is going to flop because it looks terrible. It looks like a mess. It looks like a throwback to a mid-aughts comic book movie. That won't fly in the MCU post Black Panther universe. or whatever, whenever it was, post Avengers universe. It just doesn't fly. And so, and Dark Phoenix is just like them tripling down on a terrible formula. And this is what happens. You have one of the biggest disasters probably of the decade right now, to close out this decade. Yeah, it's got to be one of the biggest disasters of the decade. It's just a total train wreck across the board. How much is it going to drop? I can't believe it dropped 72%. Like I've been following this stuff for a long time, and you just don't see a drop. Like if it was like 60%, I'd be like, oh, that's bad. That's really bad. But 72%, like I can't even think. The last movie I thought that like dropped that much that was a really big movie from a big studio. The only thing I can think of are horror films. That's pretty much it. And maybe like you had a huge, massive movie that popped off like, you know, $150+ million opening weekend, and then it kind of came back down to earth. Maybe something like Batman vs Superman. What did that drop? But it's up there as like one of the worst sort of just face plants ever. I mean, it's just a total shit show. Good riddance, I guess, for Fox and X-Men. It's over. Number 5 this weekend was Rocket Man from Paramount, 8.8 million. Great drop, 36% drop. This is one of those musical biopics, just like Bohemian Rhapsody, where it just the drops are so good that it's going to make so much money on its 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th weekend. It made, let's see where it's at right now, 66.1 million. That's a really good take for that movie. And I think it's going to keep legging out here for the next 3-4 weeks. So it's going to have a good, probably 8-week run and, you know, make what, probably $100 million. Maybe not 100, but like maybe it'll cruise past 80. So like 90-ish. Really good performance. I think that's a big win for Paramount. Number 6, we had a new wide release opener, Shaft 2019, as opposed to Shaft 2000 and Shaft, the original 1971. So this had, all 3 Shafts in it. The new one, Samuel L., and the original, did 8.3 million in about 3,000 theaters. This is like, talk about flop. This is a huge flop. $28,000 or $2,800 per theater. For a movie like this on opening weekend, that is a total shit show. Critics hated it, 35%, 48 out of 100 score. Verified audience loved it, 93% verified score on Tomatoes. All audience actual score 92, which is so high. All audience 90%. Just crushing it here. Cinema score of an A, post track of 4 stars. So the general audience tends to love it here. Critics absolutely hate it. The Letterboxd film Twitter film snobs hated it. 2.8 or 56 out of 100. Shaft 2000 sits at 54 out of 100. The original Shaft sits at 66, kind of the high watermark for the series. Obviously, because the original is fantastic. Like the original is a legendary film, and of course that's why they remade it in 18 years later in 2000, and how we got another one 19 years later in 2019. It's just nobody showed up for this. Hitman's Bodyguard. I pulled a couple of Samuel L. Jackson movies just to give some context to the Letterboxd scores. Hitman's Bodyguard, which nobody loves, but scored a 60 out of 100, so better than this. Pulp Fiction, kind of the high water mark for Samuel L. Jackson in terms of the film community, I would say. On Letterboxd, 4.4 or 88 out of 100. That's definitely the high water mark for what he's done. And also a high watermark for like most films. Like if you're approaching 90 on Letterboxd, you're basically a masterpiece. Okay, so it was tracking $20 to $22 million when we started tracking about 3 to 4 weeks ago. They were expecting something similar to what the original 2000 version had done, about $22 million. What happened here? This one's a really tough read, especially because the audiences are loving it, and I've only heard good things about it online. And the verified audience score for 93%, it's just, you can't argue with that. People do really like this movie. In terms of demographics who showed up, obviously this is a big African-American movie because it's like an African-American icon film, the original. 44% of the audience this weekend was African-American. Normally a normal audience for a movie, 12%. So talk about, that's like the biggest over index I think I've ever seen, or at least close to it. 35% white. Normally they're 55% of a movie going audience. 11% Latino, way down. That's like usually 20%, 7% Asians, pretty right on track with the average movie going audience. $35 million production budget here. Foreign rights were sold off to Netflix. $6 to $7 million. I wonder when that's premiering on international Netflix, because the only reason I say this, and I noticed this with Booksmart, and I just noticed it with another movie, when they sell off rights international and do day, what do you call that, day of day release or whatever, something, where they put it on Netflix right when it gets into theaters, it's pirated obviously immediately, and it's an HD version of the film, 1080p up online the day it gets released in theaters. It's on every single site in the world. If that's true, then like I just don't get that strategy. I don't get it. Like with Booksmart, I thought it was a terrible idea. An HD copy of Booksmart was I think uploaded the day it played in theaters, so it's not something you should do. Like at least wait a month, have it open in theaters domestically, have it make its money. Then if you have international stuff you want to do on Netflix or any streaming service, go ahead and turn that on, and then it'll eliminate that immediate. It's not even that like piracy won't exist always. Like I can go online now and find every single movie that's been released, pirated version, a cam version, an HD rip version, but you want to make it hard for people to do that. You don't want to make it easy. Anybody who has a brain can find these movies pretty quickly. What you don't want to see is that a 1080p version on every streaming site ever uploaded immediately. And so that's, I hope that didn't happen here. It did. It's funny. It did happen with Hitman's Bodyguard, because that was a Netflix release, I want to say over in Asia. And so the day it gets released, it's online. Like, you know, people are pretty lazy. And if you give them the option to watch it in their home and the same quality they would in the theater to some degree, they're going to do that instead of buying a $15 ticket. So, let's see here. So that was, Shaft here. Audience 75% over 25. Deadline calls out old IP. That's why. So huge over 25 audience. Not that outrageous. Normally it's about 66% over 25. So definitely a little bit higher than normal. 44% over 35. That's very high. Ladies were at 53%. Male was 47%. That's an over index on female audience by a slightly significant margin there. So Shaft, it felt like it feels like a missed opportunity more than anything. I don't know. It's hard to read why something like this doesn't do well, but I think it's too old of an IP. It's too old of a property. No one was asking for a Shaft movie. Especially because Shaft's kind of the concept of it is a little bit sexist. It feels like, from what I remember, that doesn't play anymore at all. And I think they over targeted the African American demographic. You need that group of people to show up. That's like your vanguard group to show up for this movie, but that needs to spill out over to the non-African American demographic, and that's 88% of the country, of both U.S. and Canada, a little bit more in Canada. So I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, the tracking was saying 2022. I thought that was an appropriate tracking amount. That felt good for this movie. It's summer. It's fucking middle of June. And this should have been a huge opening here. For this, I see no reason when this didn't open to $30 million. It could have opened to 30. I think this was probably a marketing problem, where they just didn't, you know what you should have done? Here, just a quick thought, throwing this out there. Because who knows what Shaft is, honestly. Sure, Shaft 2000 came out, but that was all throwback to the original Shaft 1972. 1972 was 47 years ago, right? So it's only 50 years old. You have to educate people. Anybody under the age of 30 has no idea who Shaft is. They've never seen that movie. They have no idea what the hell you're talking about. You know, I have a vague recollection of it, only just through culture in the 80s of it coming up every once in a while, maybe the 90s and then the reboot in 2000. But so I have a little bit of education about it, but I can't even imagine. I'm 36 going on 37. I can't imagine somebody under the age of 30 have any idea who Shaft is and what it was all about. And it's also sort of like the philosophy and ideology of that character was so 70s, which I think a lot of younger people would be super fascinated by. The sexist stuff you kind of have to sort of remove and excise, but there was an opportunity here to educate younger people about the origins of the character, and they just didn't really do that in the marketing. They just expected you. That's, I think, what happened. They expected people to know who Shaft was, and the average 25-year-old has no idea what you're talking about, let alone a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old. Like, so I think there's just a lack of education about what Shaft was all about. And there's the assumption that people just know what it was, and they didn't. That's why they didn't show up. That's my sort of quick read on it. Okay, so that was not a great performance at all. That's going nowhere. So number 7 this weekend was Godzilla, King of Monsters, 47% drop, 8.1 million, $2,500 per theater in its third weekend. Total take so far is $93 million domestically. Let's take a look at international real quick. It's doing 339 international. Current breakdown 27 to 73% domestic to foreign take so far. This is one of the biggest flops of the year. It's total disaster. International is doing okay, but domestic's just a real. It's going to lose maybe $100 million, maybe more. It's a massive flop, and Godzilla, Dark Phoenix, Men in Black. I think the biggest flop of them all feels like Dark Phoenix, but King of Godzilla cost a lot more, so it might end up losing more money. But it has been a very floppy summer so far. So that's number 7. Number 8 was John Wick 3 Parabellum, 6.1 million, an amazing 17% drop. I wonder if that had to do. So Keanu Reeves did this huge announcement at E3. So E3 is the video game show they do every year. It's just become this huge deal because, 20 years ago, video games were obviously an important part of our culture, but video games since then have become, I think they far out in terms of revenue make more money than movies, video games now. It's just become an integral part of our culture. And Keanu Reeves showed up to do an announcement that he's going to basically be in the biggest computer game of probably the next 5-10 years, which is Cyberpunk 77, which is the group of people that did Witcher 3. Witcher 3 is probably one of the greatest games ever made, easily. But Keanu Reeves did this huge announcement at E3, and the reaction from the crowd was ecstatic, and he was like completely overwhelmed by it. Everybody just loves Keanu Reeves. We love Keanu Reeves. I can't tell you why. I think he's just like a really chill guy. He's really nice, and he seems like he cares about other people in a really honest and authentic way. And I think people react to that. It's almost like the Bob Ross phenomenon that happened when Twitch started to stream Bob Ross episodes, the painting guy on PBS. There was something so wholesome about him and nice and caring and loving from a male, but as a male perspective. I think he's just like the opposite of what we see every day in our culture, and I think that's why people love him so much. But I think that's his announcement at E3 for Cyberpunk 77 is the reason why this has only dropped 17%. Total take so far for John Wick 3 is $149 million, essentially, domestically here. A huge win. There's going to be another one, best performing one in the series. It has really become one of the most successful action movie series here in the last decade. It's a really big, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for Lionsgate. It's a big deal for Keanu Reeves, who's like, he's like 53 years old. So he's like an old action star, like Liam Neeson type series. Having this sort of like huge renaissance as an action star in his 50s. Really cool to see, but a great performance. Number 9 is one I want to spend some time on, so buckle up. Late Night from Amazon Studios. So we've talked about this one on the podcast for a while, and we've talked about it because it is sort of an indie comedy that is beloved in the festival circuit. Sundance, this thing was like off the charts buzz, same as Booksmart. And so it got snatched up for $13 million from Amazon. They're like, we're going to buy this up. We're going to put it out in the summer. They spent $35 million to market this movie. $35 million. It's only a domestic movie, I think. $35 million. $13 million to buy. It went wide this weekend after a single weekend in a platform release. They put it out in New York and Los Angeles last weekend. It did $5.1 million on 2,220 theaters. That is a per theater average of $2,300. This is an absolute disaster. And it's a disaster in a whole variety of levels. So one, we talked about the possibility of this happening with Booksmart after Booksmart collapsed. So Booksmart was a huge flop. It's still out there. It's the same releasing company, I believe, United Artists Releasing, which is an Annapurna MGM sort of joint venture. So maybe that's the connection here. But Late Night, there was just a fear that it was too indie, too offbeat, I mean, you have Emma Thompson as a star. Like, everybody knows who she is. The subject matter seemed a little bit wonky, like plays well probably in the media centers like LA and New York, but outside that, who cares about the behind the scenes of a writing for a Tonight Show type program? It seemed kind of like a long shot to do well and break out, but the quality seemed so high that Amazon was like, when people saw it at Sundance, they just loved it. And so that, I think that it kind of got into a feeding frenzy situation where this small little snow globe audience adored it, but they didn't really think about, are people in Omaha going to want to go see this? Are people in, like Grapevine, Texas going to go see this? Like, it just didn't, I didn't see how they made that leap. But they did make the leap, and they put the chips on the line here, and it has not worked out at all. I can't imagine how they spent $35 million to market this movie. That just blows my mind. It's so irresponsible. To think that, like, okay, here's the deal. Let's go through the numbers real quick, and I'll go on my long rant. Rotten Tomatoes score, 81% from critics. Fantastic score there, but a 69 out of 100 as the actual score. So it was one of those situations where everybody kind of liked it, but they weren't like totally loved it. It's not a masterpiece. Verified audience score, super high, 83%, 83 out of 100 actual score. That's a really good sign, which is why it's kind of upsetting it's not doing well. All audience score, 77%, a little bit lower, 78 out of 100. A cinema score of a B+, that's good. It's not fantastic, but it's good. Post-track, 4 out of 5, that's great. Letterboxd score, 3.3 or 66 out of 100. That's strong. Compared to Booksmart. Booksmart, I think, has gone up on Letterboxd. Because I think more people have seen it. It sits at a 4.1. It broke the 80 mark on Letterboxd. That's like masterpiece zone. Compared to Big Sick, I think Big Sick is a really great comp for this. Also Amazon, also kind of indie comedy released in the summer. We'll talk a little bit about how that was platformed for a month, and then it started to expand really wide. On Letterboxd, 3.8, 76 out of 100 for that one. I thought another good comp would be Funny People, just because kind of, indie-ish comedy that seemed pretty insular about making comedy, kind of meta. So that sits at 3 or 60 out of 100 on Letterboxd. And so I think that, like, if I'm looking at the quality here, just a quick read on it, critics liked it. They weren't super in love with it. Audiences are actually loving it more than critics, with that 83% score from the verified audience. That's a really big deal. Cinema score is a little bit lower than I expected. I expected an A- for this, B+, but that's not bad. It's not that abnormal of a piece of data. Post-track 4 totally makes sense. So basically you're sitting around an 80 out of 100 with all these scores. So the audiences really liked it to go see it, but not a ton of people saw it. We went over $13 acquisition cost at Sundance, $35 million in marketing spent on this. That's a deadline number. I'm assuming that's accurate. That just seems outrageous to me, because I read this stuff constantly. Something like this, for a film like this, strong social media push, maybe 20 million, maybe 25. I would not spend nothing north. I wouldn't spend anything north of 20. But maybe that's why it's not doing so. I don't know. Amazon knew this thing was gonna tank. Tracking was sitting at a $4 to $5 million opening as of 3 weeks ago, probably. So they knew this thing wasn't going to do well. That's why they balked on the initial wide release last weekend and said, "Oh my God, we got to do something here. Let's put this out in New York and Los Angeles and get that buzz." And that, I think that worked, because remember last weekend we talked about its per theater average. It's the highest per theater average of the year. It did over $60K per theater in New York, Los Angeles. So that was a big headline. And they played that really well and really right, but it wasn't enough. The crowd here was 68% female, 32% male. There's one of your problems. Over-indexing on the female audience. That's not a bad thing. But like, if you want a movie to do well, you need it to be about, you should probably be closer to like, it's something that's way too high. 60% female, I could see. I would push towards like a 50% female, 45% male ratio there. The issue here on the marketing and all that kind of stuff, it was Emma Thompson. It was all female driven. It's female driven. The entire movie is. And there weren't, I can't remember, there's like one or two male characters. This guy in Veepin's in it. Mindy Kaling, of course, wrote it, and she's one of the stars. John Lithgow's in it. Hugh Dancy's in it. Like, I didn't see these guys in the trailer. So what I'm trying to say here is that, like, I'm not trying to be like, oh, it's over focused on women, but on some degree, if you want it to be successful, you do have to play it to a little wider of an audience. That 68% female, it's too high. In the same way that maybe Shaft focused way too much on the African American demo and zeroed in on them, I think Late Night may have focused too much on the female demographic. And not even, it's probably just like, cosmopolitan urban females went to go see this, if that makes sense. Like bachelors or higher education, certain income level. They probably like zeroed in on that demographic thinking like, oh, that's going to bring us over the top. It's not going to. You need to sort of have a bigger tent in order to make more money with these films. And I'm not saying change what the film is. I'm saying change the marketing. Marketing is sleight of hand. Marketing is a way, it's a hook. It's a way to people to get in the theater. Once they get in there, they can enjoy it for whatever it is. I'm not saying you change the film. What I'm saying is that you have to sell this to a broader audience, and they oversold it to an audience that was already going to go see it. And that's the problem. One of the problems. In terms of the audience, 63% white, 16% Latino, 13% Asian, 8% African American. Not very surprising at all. Over-indexed on the white folks. 77% over 25. That's kind of an issue. I know this would be a tough sell for the under 25 audience because it does seem kind of wonky, but it doesn't have to be. Here was one of the issues too. I think they overplayed the marketing towards a very specific part of the female demographic. Not all females, just a very specific part of that demographic. Two, they overplayed this is about writing for a late night show. That turns people off, because if you don't write for a late night show, or you don't live in New York and you don't work in the comedy scene or whatever, you may not be that interested in it. And that's one of the good things that like other movies have done, where it might be about that, but you don't market it that way. I'm like, basically what I'm arguing here is that, like, they should have lied to the audience more about what the movie was about. And that's okay. Sometimes you got to do that to get them in the seats. And they just didn't do it. I think they played it a little bit too straight down the narrow. I'll also say this about the trailer for this movie was absolutely horrific. One of the worst trailers I think I've ever seen. It was so dour and boring. There's no spark to the marketing whatsoever. That's another issue here. But we stack all this stuff up. This is a big deal because now we have a pattern. We have Booksmart, which is a fantastic film, failing. We have Late Night, which is also maybe a little bit less of a fantastic film, but a great film, also failing. And there was no need for either of these movies to fail at the box office. These all had wide mass appeal to them. They're good movies. Look at the exit polls. People loved it who saw it. So it's not a product quality problem. There's two problems happening here with these movies. One is the thing I've pointed out a lot, and Deadline tries to argue this away. And you go and read their write-up today, and they're basically like, when a distributor knows that their movie is going to fail, they push it wide because they want to make more money quickly. That doesn't, I guess that makes sense on some level, but think about it this way. Why don't you give the movie a chance to be successful? And then you can actually make money on it as opposed to mitigating your losses. Booksmart and Late Night could have easily made $30 to $40 million domestically. There is no reason why they don't. I hear all these excuses about like, oh, the audiences are different now, the streaming's taken over. Those are excuses. You have a great product and you have a place to showcase it to millions of people. You have that slot. You should be making millions of dollars off of it. But here's the thing with Late Night. So the first problem here is the same problem with Booksmart. Booksmart went wide the first weekend it went out. Terrible choice. Just an awful, awful decision to do that. Late Night was almost worse in that they were going to push it wide June 7th and then saw Booksmart. They freaked out. They saw tracking, freaked out even more and said, we can't put this out wide. Like, it's going to make like $3 million on opening weekend if you put it out wide. So instead, they open it for a single weekend in New York and Los Angeles just to get that one news article. that says, look at this amazing per theater average. It's performing so well. Of course, the general public doesn't read the per theater average. They don't know that it only played on 4 theaters. They hear late nights performing amazingly. That's what they hear, and that's what they want. And so that's a good PR move on their part. But then you don't push it out wide to 2,500 theaters or 2,300 theaters the next weekend. That doesn't make any sense. Like, for a movie like Late Night, which I do think could be successful at the box office, this needed a month. And what blows my mind about this is they did that with Big Sick. With Big Sick, they were very conservative with it. Like, they waited on that one. Like, if you look at the release sort of pattern of Big Sick, it was not an immediate wide release at all. And it ended up making $42 million domestically, which was a really good performance for that film. In Manchester by the Sea as well, totally different genre and type of film, and definitely more the prestige Oscar stuff, but never, I don't think it ever went above 1,500 theaters. And that made $47 million. So with Big Sick, I think Big Sick is like kind of the model they should have followed, which they created, like, why would you not do what you've done in the past 3 or 4 years ago, 2 years ago, actually, that worked. So, and it's the same exact time frame for the release. So Big Sick opens up on June 23rd, 2017, opens up in 5 theaters. Typical platform release, does $84K per theater. Fantastic. Limited release. Probably gotta be playing in Chicago because it takes place in Chicago. The weekend after that, it expands to 71 theaters, does $24K per theater, or $23K per theater. All right, still playing strong. Third weekend, the July sort of 4th holiday, 7th through the 9th technically, increases to 300 theaters, does $11K per theater. And then by the time it goes wide, it's 4 weeks in. And the thing is, it doesn't do all that well on wide release. And I talked about this at length on the podcast. It did not pop off on wide release with the 25K, right? Or the 2,600 theaters. It only did 2,900 per theater that weekend. But the thing was, by the time it got to that 4th weekend, the buzz and word of mouth had been created from that 4 weeks of specialty focused release. And I'm sure a lot of it had to do with the stars like really getting behind that movie and getting out there, and so, especially on social media. So it built a word of mouth that, like, it's funny, it didn't pop off on wide release, but it didn't go away. Second weekend, it drops 33%, still in 2,600 theaters. This is third week of wide release, 36% drop. Fourth week, 31% drop, 32% drop, 31% drop, 27% drop, all the way to September. It never tops a 40% drop the entire time. So what does that tell you? It tells you that, like, these are word of mouth movies. There is no way you can market your way out of these problems. It's a kind of obtuse, interesting, different type of comedy that you have to nurture. That's not going to work if you just throw up a social media ad. It's not going to work. You got to get people to go out and see it, and you got to get those people to then tell their friends to go see it. That's what happened with Big Sick. It played from June 23rd to October 22nd in the theaters, 18 weeks. Do you think Late Night's going to last 18 weeks? No freaking way it's not going to happen. And it's too bad because it's a great movie. So was Booksmart. It's just these companies, and maybe it's United Artists Releasing, just do not get how to do this. Deadline also talks, they sort of say, oh, you know, people are being too critical of the non-platform, the wide release. I don't think that we are. I think that that's the problem, number one. Number two is streaming issue. All right, so Amazon Prime can put this up whenever they want to. They own the movie. Obviously, they're going to like respect the 90-day window from theatrical release to digital. I also don't buy that. Look, it could be great on Amazon Prime. That's cool. It's a feature film though, and I think it needs to be in the theater. And I just don't see why. It just seemed like they tried to push it in the theater, but not to give it the support that it needed. Late Night should have been platformed for a month at least, maybe longer, maybe 6 weeks in platform. Get that word of mouth going, make people aware of it. Also, think about it this way. You own the rights to the material, right? You can hold it back from digital, from anything, as long as you want. Have it play for 2 months on limited release. Get people super stoked about it. Get the word of mouth, to the point where everybody knows about it because somebody they've known in a big city saw it, and then push it wide and see what happens. I don't know. It just seemed like there's got to be an alternative to these movies failing, because Late Night and Booksmart should be released in movie theaters and they should be doing well, and they're not. And I think it comes down to marketing and the releasing strategy and why that's happening. So we'll keep an eye on Late Night, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It's like Booksmart went nowhere. Okay, so that's number 9, Late Night, 5.1 million. That's my rant on that. Ma was 10 at 3.6 million. That was sitting at, $40 million. So that's a huge win. So back to this whole, if Universal Blumhouse can make a movie for $5 million, and they've done this over and over and over again, and they get people to show up in a movie like Ma, which is a bizarre horror kind of thriller thing, to make $40 million, there's no reason why a Late Night can't make $40 million. There's no excuse. And I think it just comes down to marketing and releasing strategy. They just don't know what they're doing with it. Okay, so that's the top 10. There was one outside the top 10, Dead Don't Die. Focus Features, the zombie movie, 600 theaters, 3,800 per theater. The reaction to that one's all over the place. The top 10 theaters are Alamo Drive. It's a nerd film. It's a nerd zombie film. Jim Jarmusch. 3,800 per theater. That's okay. I've heard it's not very good, is what I've heard. I've heard critics don't like it that much. I've heard some really negative reaction from fans. It's not going anywhere. I don't think it's going to expand all that much. A $3,800 per theater average on 600 theaters is not good enough to expand wide. And maybe they know that, and this is a smaller film. They tried. Maybe now you just get rid of it. Now that's a situation where it's maybe there isn't a mass appeal for a movie like this, so we got to put it on streaming or whatever. Okay, so that's mostly everything. Not much to talk about. Limited release, Last Black Man in San Francisco, 36 theaters now, 10K per theater, did 300K, 360K this weekend, so pretty good, but probably not going to break out anything big. So that's the headlines overall. I think to pull out the big stories, Men in Black's a flop. Dark Phoenix is one of the biggest flops. Godzilla's a huge flop. John Wick is a winner. Late Night's a flop. Aladdin, John Wick, and Rocket Man are winners. Dark Phoenix, Shaft, Secret Life of Pets 2, Men in Black International, and Late Night are all losers. With Secret Life of Pets probably break even, but it's a huge underperformance for the first one. So it's definitely it's a tale of two cities. There's some big winners and some big losers. There's not a lot in between. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming on the next weekend to close out the show. Anna, Child's Play, Toy Story 4, and Wild Rose come out next weekend. Toy Story 4, I think, is tracking to $180 to $200 million opening weekend. That seems inflated to me. I'm not a huge believer that it's going to do $200 million, but I might be just misreading the audience and buzz on that one. Yesterday comes out on the 28th. That looks like it could do pretty well. Kind of feels like an indie comedy that Universal is pushing wide from Danny Boyle, but I get in my gut, I get a little breakout feeling on that one. Annabelle Comes Home comes out on the 26th. Then we're into July. July's going to be really fascinating. Midsummer on the 3rd, along with Spider-Man, also coming out on the 3rd. Actually, that comes out on Tuesday, before the holiday there. Then on the 12th, you have Crawl, you have Stuber. Stuber looks insanely terrible, but it could be good. Lion King on the 19th. The Boy 2 on the 26th. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's new one on the 26th. And then I guess that's through August. I mean, I haven't even looked at August yet. Oh, Hobbs and Shaw comes out on the 2nd of August. Then it's Dumping Zone. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Look for that one. Lionsgate on August 9th. I think it could do really well. Dora the Explorer comes out on the 9th. That could do well. August 16th, you have 47 Meters Down Uncaged. I might go see that opening weekend. Some other stuff coming out. Angry Birds 2. I didn't know they were making one on the 14th. Blinded by the Light. Blinded by the Light also looks like it could break out. Looks like a really good movie. Kind of seems indie, but it's Warner Brothers releasing. And then some smaller stuff to close out. Remember, the end of August is the doldrums. It's one of the quietest seasons at the box office. So an interesting start to the summer. It has not been as popped off as I thought it was going to be. A lot of flops so far that I thought weren't going to flop. I didn't really think any of these movies were going to flop besides Dark Phoenix. stuff like Godzilla doing terrible, Shaft doing poorly was super surprising to me. Maybe people are just saving their money for Toy Story 4 and Spider-Man. We'll see. In any event, guys, thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will be back next weekend. Take care.